Hey guys, today I'm making a video response to Darkantics. It's going to be mostly about one of the versions of the problem of evil. I'll put a link to his video in the Monopo section. Let's go ahead and get started.
This is the most basic version of the logical problem of evil. If Yahweh knows how to prevent all evil, has the power to prevent all evil, and is perfectly good, then it logically follows that evil should not exist.
Right. Specifically, the logical problem of evil concludes, therefore, it is logically impossible that both God and evil can coexist. That's why it's called the logical problem of evil. Being aware of that's going to be important a bit later on.
However, William Lane Craig, a very deceitful Christian apologist, described the problem of evil like this.
According to the logical version of the problem of evil, it's logically impossible that God and evil could coexist. If God exists, then evil cannot exist.
I think it'll be painfully obvious to most of you why this is not a misrepresentation of the argument. Craig is defending the Christian understanding of God, and the Christian understanding of God already includes the specific properties of omniscience, omnipotence, and omnibenevolence. It's built into the very definition of who the Christian God is. Now, I could honestly care less about anyone's opinion of Craig's character. I just happen to think that Darkantics' critiques are quite poor. But let's get to some of the actual substance.
If evil exists, then God cannot exist. The two are logically incompatible. Now, since evil evidently exists, it follows, therefore, that God does not exist. But the problem with this argument is that there's no reason to think that God and evil are logically incompatible.
Craig makes it clear to say that there is no reason to think that they are logically incompatible. Then in the background, Darkantics points towards God's characteristics as if they are some sort of reason. And I'm going to use a quick example to show why these characteristics do not constitute logical incompatibility. Let's say there's this guy called Epidemic 2020, and then he makes philosophy videos on YouTube, and then he's nerdy, and then he's white. Now because of that, you may think it is logically impossible that this guy knows how to dance. Even though it may seem unlikely to you that he would know how to dance, there's no explicit logical contradiction. There is a possible world in which a nerdy white guy who makes philosophy videos can know how to do something like salsa dancing. Even if you think it's unlikely, you are not justified in calling it a logical contradiction, because there's simply no explicit logical contradiction in terms.
After all, there's no explicit contradiction between them. So if the atheist means that there is an implicit contradiction between God and evil, then he must be assuming some sort of hidden premises which need to be brought to the light and which would serve to make this contradiction explicit.
You seem to think the hidden premises that Craig is talking about is referring to God's characteristics. And I think you're mistaken about that. We'll see why in a minute.
Craig said this.
But the problem is that no philosopher has ever been able to demonstrate successfully what these premises are.
So Craig, the so-called professional philosopher, is either woefully incompetent philosopher, or he's a liar.
Or you're just mistaken. Craig is merely arguing that the characteristics of God, omnipotence, omniscience, omnibenevolence, and the existence of evil, do not contain an explicit logical contradiction. Now, it may seem unlikely to you that those things can coexist, but it is no more logically contradictory than having a white philosophy nerd who can dance. Anyone who supports the logical problem of evil must be relying on an implicit contradiction, because there is no clear explicit logical contradiction between the characteristics you listed. That means that there must be some additional hidden premises in the logical problem of evil, and an example of what one of those hidden premises might look like is an omnibenevolent deity would never allow any amount of suffering if he could stop it. That's the kind of hidden premise he would be talking about.
This logical problem of evil has been a big problem for Christianity for a long time, but the free will defense solves it.
Alright, so real quick, just a bit of background information. The free will defense is just an argument which explains a possible world in which an all-loving, all-powerful, all-knowing deity and evil could coexist, because an all-loving deity would want us to have free will, and free will allows for the genuine possibility of evil. Now, Darkantics thinks that this causes additional problems for Christianity.
To accept this defense means to abandon the concept of heaven as we know it, because if there is such a place with both free will and an absence of evil, like heaven, then the free will defense falls apart unless people in heaven either do not have free will or evil exists there.
That actually wouldn't hurt the free will defense at all, as I'll explain more in a moment. But for right now, I'm going to share some of my ideas about free will in heaven. I think that's interesting enough of a topic on its own. For you to think that the free will defense eliminates the concept of heaven leads me to think that you don't fully understand the free will defense. There are a lot of different theories out there about free will in heaven, and have been so for many, many years. But the free will defense doesn't force your hand as to which one of these theories you're going to think are more likely. Now, about 2 years ago, I posted a video expressing some of my thoughts on this, but I know a lot of y'all haven't seen that, so I'll recap my views really quickly here. I think of heaven as the most ideal world. So that'd be a place where we could have both chosen love and no evil. But in order to have chosen love, we must first have moral free will. But again, moral free will allows for the possibility of evil. So in order to have a world with chosen love and no possibility of evil, we could have a precursor world with moral free will, aka Earth. And if on Earth you choose to use your moral free will to love God and abhor evil, then the capacity to do evil would become superfluous in a place like heaven. Anyway, that's just one way that we could experience chosen love without the possibility of evil in heaven. But that's just one perspective.
Now, if God has free will and does not commit evil, then evil is not a requisite of free will, thus again rendering the free will defense useless. And of course, this all assumes that we even accept the notion of free will.
The free will defense does not say that if free will exists, then evil must occur, as you seem to think. So your arguments do not in any way call into question the free will defense. Ironically, you don't even have to accept free will to be able to recognize that the free will defense works. See, even if free will is just possible rather than actual, it still shows a scenario in which the God we are discussing and evil can coexist. This means it is not logically impossible for God and evil to coexist. And since the logical problem of evil claims that it is logically impossible for God and evil to coexist, then it's very clear that the logical problem of evil is false.
Another point of contention is concerned with the probability that an omnibenevolent God would allow the sheer amount of suffering that we know exists in the world today and throughout history.
That version is called the Evidential problem of evil. Now, I did a series on the various versions of the problem of evil, and I started with that version. So if you're interested in that, you might enjoy checking out these videos as well. And if you want this video to be seen or critiqued by more people, then be sure to leave a rating, and as always, test everything, hold on to the good.